about sports.
All right, we've had an unusual happening in Monroeville, Pennsylvania over the last few days. It has not rained. It's been a little exciting here. I don't have a flood in my basement, so I'm happy. So we're here tonight with Gary, Kimba the White Lion Kim, your favorite as a child, was it not?
Yes, it was, Dave.
You caught him a few times at the dorm at Duquesne watching it.
Yes, I did. This is a public forum, so.
Oh, man. Didn't know he was so sensitive. And, of course, Chris, the great Gazoo Fletcher. One of your favorites.
Dum-dums.
Oh, yeah. And I'll be Dave Fudd Finoli this week. Well, gentlemen, how are you?
All right, how you doing, young man?
If I was any better, I'd be you, Gary.
What's the hat, Dave? You gotta explain the clothes again here. What's the hat?
The hat is our new symbol at Duquesne.
Gary, come on.
Okay, come on. I'm living 350 miles away. Come on.
I've decided to join the anybody over 30 hates this logo. Anybody under 30 loves it. But this is the new Duquesne logo, and of course the Greensburg Green Sox.
There we go.
Very nice.
And I see Fletch is he's got the most famous football team in Pittsburgh.
Well, the Maulers.
Yes.
Tom Rooney being hell, fellas. Tom Rooney.
You gonna ask me what I got or no? Not gonna ask.
We'll go to that.
Bring it up.
Something
How about the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York? How about that?
Fabulous.
Yes.
Fabulous.
The Congress Boxing Club in Pittsburgh.
There we go. There we go. That's even better.
What a way to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Beat that.
We have tonight with us one of the country's greatest boxing historians, and as well as probably the preeminent Pittsburgh boxing historian, Douglas Cavanaugh, who is the keeper of the flame in what I feel is probably the best piece of boxing journalism I've ever read. When Pittsburgh Was a Fight Town by Roy McHugh, the late Roy McHugh, who is an icon in Pittsburgh sports writing history. This, as you've said many times, Douglas, is his last gift to us.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit how you met Roy and how you came to be the keeper of the flame of this incredible piece of boxing history?
Well, just getting involved in the history of boxing and really starting to study it, I noticed that a rather disproportionate number of fighters I admired were from Pittsburgh. So maybe want to look deeper. And not too long after that, Roy had an article published. There was a series in Ring magazine, The Ring, back in, I think it was in the early 90s, about every city on the map, every fight mecca, and its top 10 or top 12, I forget the number, greatest fighters. And Roy did Pittsburgh. Oh, fantastic. So I just saw all those names. I went, there you go. What's in the water there? So I started looking around and trying to find out how I could find out more about these guys by looking for a book. No book was written on the subject, at least that I knew of. So I decided to look up Roy, and he was actually listed. So I cold called him one day. I was kind of nervous. What was I going to tell him about Pittsburgh boxing? You know, I'd studied it for a while. And we just became friends. We just both enjoyed talking about it. It was obviously something he didn't get to talk to with too many people outside of Pittsburgh, because it's sort of a lost civilization there. Everybody forgets what a great fight town it was. You know, it's the Penguins, it's the Steelers, it's the Pirates, and nobody knows about the boxing past, which for a period of time was the greatest of any city. You know, I can't think of any city that had it better from the 30s to the 40s. I mean, fantastic history there. And nobody seemed to know about it. So we just became fast friends, and it continued until the day he passed away. But every time we talked boxing, he never lost his enthusiasm. Even at 103 years of age, his eyes would get bright, and he would get so excited, and it was amazing. It was like I say in the book, it was like two kids discussing their favorite baseball cards and swapping them. There was just an enthusiasm that was infectious. And I think that's what kept him alive for so long. He just never lost his enthusiasm for life and for people and for what he did. Never lost enthusiasm. He loved it. He listened. There was no mechanical answers with Roy. He answered your questions. He listened to your responses. He had conversations. It wasn't just parallel monologues like it gets with a lot of the elderly. I hate to say, but we know. And a lot of them start to talk by, never that way with Roy. Never. You all actually had dialogue with him, and it was great.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. He introduced me to so many great people, and told me stories. And it was interesting because after he wrote the book, there were fighters, and I said, Roy, there's a lot of fighters missing here. He says, like who? He says, we will. He says, who? And Jack McClellan, who? How much of the fighters that, other than like Frank Klaus and Harry Greb, the obvious champions, not much about filling the gaps in the book. And he actually did his own research and learned a lot about Wee Willie Davies, one of the greatest fighters to never win a world championship, along with Charlie Burley.
Well, Douglas, I'm assuming that you're a fan of the show, so I've got a two-part question for you.
Uh-oh.
If you've been watching this, you probably know that there's a little bad blood between Gary and Drake. My question is, do you think Gary could take Drake?
Oh, boy. I would have to have you guys stand up and move around the room for a minute.
There's no way you could have been prepared for that question. Right.
Do you walk like a pit bull or do you walk like a chihuahua?
Gary, could you please walk
Shake or do you strut?
But seriously, what fighter would you have liked to have seen of all the ones that were in that book?
Greb, hands down. He had almost 300 fights. We don't have any surviving film that we know of. We know that about 5 of his fights were filmed. We haven't found them yet. But then again, we never even found something as recent as the 1960 World Series between the Pirates and the Yankees until just a few years ago.
True.
Crosby's attic, of all places. So there's Greb film somewhere.
And a lot of people don't really appreciate this guy's a top 10 fighter in the history of the sport.
Easily. If you look at his resume, people say, oh, but we don't have film, we don't know. You don't need film. I don't need film of Genghis Khan to know he was a great general. I don't need film of George Washington to know he was a great president. I don't need film of Cy Young to know that he was a greater pitcher than, Pedro Strop. I don't need film of that. I know it. It's right there. So grab the guys he beat, we have film on. Gene Tunney, Mike O'Dowd, Mike Gibbons, Tommy Gibbons. And he beat all these guys with room to spare. He's just so dominant, and he was a top contender at 3 divisions at the same time: middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight.
Right. Well, and these guys this wasn't like 2 or 3 bouts a year like it is now either. I mean, you mentioned the heavy volume of fights that he had.
Yeah. He won 1919. He went 45-0. And we're not talking tomatoes there. We're talking about top contenders. We're talking about champions, guys who are in the Hall of Fame. A few lugs in there, he just needed to keep busy. He needed to put food on the table. He had a restless disposition. He couldn't sit still. I mean, the guy who was Art Rooney's best man at his wedding, George Engel, was Greb's manager for a short period of time after he and Red Mason had a falling out. Engel could get in better matches, but he had to space them far apart, Greb couldn't stand it. He was too restless. He could not wait for these matches. He was used to fighting every other week. So he got rid of Engel and went back to Mason. At least not as much money, but at least he's getting me fights. So, but yeah, I want to see Greb. Absolutely. Most people would.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you say that, Douglas, because the one thing I want to ask you first is just your thoughts on one of the rivalries that, as you say, Dave and I have talked about this. Pittsburgh boxing history is interesting. There's a ton of amazing history in it, but there's not a lot of pictures. And you're right, particularly before 1920, there's hardly any press coverage at all that you can find. It's minimal. And you talk about McClellan. There's a book out on McClellan now, which I just gave Dave, because I had never, as much as I know, and I love that era, that 1895 to 1920 era in particular.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find any information on Pittsburgh boxing at that time. And there is a book on McClellan. It's not particularly well written, but it's out there, and it's on Amazon. It's written by a Pittsburgh guy. Not necessarily a boxing historian, but just for your benefit.
Jack McClellan's great-great-grandson, actually.
Is that who it is? Okay. I wasn't sure of that. And I don't know, have you ever, and as this is an aside before I ask you the question about that rivalry between Greb and Tunney, have you read anything from Springs Toledo? Because he has a book out now. I think it's called Smokestack something. It's on Kindle. Right. It's excellent. And he's a novelist, but he weaves in all the historical stuff. And it's interesting how Greb gave Dempsey all kinds of trouble in sparring, even though he had a 30-pound differential in weight. And he predicted that Tunney would whip Dempsey because of all Tenney's boxing skill that he saw grow in their 5 fights.
Right.
You know, so, I mean, Greb nobody ever talks about that he actually was giving somebody who didn't fight that much, was an iconic champion, all kinds of trouble as a much smaller guy. And quite frankly, I mean, Tunney said, and I'm sure you probably have the better quotes, but Tunney said he's never been in fights like that, and they prepared him for everything that came thereafter, including fighting for their guys. Right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, Jack Kearns didn't want that information about, Jack Doc Kearns was Dempsey's manager. He definitely didn't want that information. You have this little middleweight.
Correct.
And in such a beating and sparring, so yeah.
But tell me your thoughts on that rivalry, because those 5 fights, when you look at them, it's interesting how Tunney grew, and he seemed to do better with Greb as the rivalry wore on. And it's a rivalry that nobody really talks about now, but is 2 all-time greats, and it's quite a sequence in that 5 or 6 year period where they fought each other so much. So I'm curious for your thoughts on that.
Well, the prevailing myth for decades has been, and this is a lot of due to the fact that Tunney fought out of New York, which is, of course, the media capital. The media guys are always going to side with their boys' side of the story instead of what really happened. Tunney never figured out Greb. The prevailing myth is that they fought once, Greb beat the blazes out of him, and Tunney learned from that and beat him in every fight afterwards, which is completely untrue. The second fight of theirs was given to Tunney in Tunney's backyard. It was a blatant robbery, considered one of the worst in New York history at the time. 19 of 23 newspaper men, 19 of 23, that's a landslide, said that Greb should not have left that ring without his title. Some of the most brilliant minds in boxing, Dumb Dan Morgan, so many people said no.
Yep.
Greb beat him up, again.
Yep.
But that goes down as a win for Tunney. They're fighting Cleveland. None of the Cleveland papers had Tunney winning. It was either Greb or a draw, which to me means Greb probably had a shade. And even in another one of their fights, Greb, which Tunney kind of seemed to shade, Greb had his supporters saying, well, Greb kind of won. The only time Tunney dominated Greb was in their last fight when Greb was blind in one eye, getting old, he slowed down. I mean, but it's still perpetuated today, this myth that Tunney mastered Greb. He never did. He could never figure Harry out. He just gritted his teeth and did what he could.
Right. And I think media-wise,
they say that this one's really funny. Is they say that, well, he couldn't hit. Harry was what I call an elusive pressure fighter, which is a rarity in boxing. There's no such thing as an elusive pressure fighter, but he was. He would swarm you and then dart out of the way. He was like a hummingbird. He was all over the place.
Yeah.
And Tunney couldn't hit his head with anything. He even admitted it in their first fight. So in the second fight, he concentrated more on the body in every fight after. So everyone acted like this was such a masterstroke. Oh, he decided to go for Greb's body. And isn't that what every boxer does? If you can't hit the head, you go to the body. It's not some genius thing that Tunney figured out how to do. It's what any amateur does.
And it took almost 50 rounds to figure it out. It took him 50 rounds to figure that out. Right?
Reputation as this master scientist, from going to the head to the body? And it still really didn't slow Greb down. He couldn't do anything with him. It was like fighting a wood chipper. He just kept buzzing all over him.
Yeah.
So, to me, that fight, that series, you could very reasonably call it 3-2 in Greb's favor. 3 fights to 2. At least 3 nights, he was the better man. That, to me, is indisputable.
Yep, I agree.
Douglas, one of my favorite in Pittsburgh boxing history, a guy who I consider one of the top 50 athletes in Pittsburgh history, was Charlie Burley. Man who never won a title, yet Sports Illustrated ranked him as the 4th greatest middleweight of all time in front of such luminaries as Greb and Hagler. Why don't you talk a little about Charlie Burley?
The modern era, for me, because I'm a little older, but like 80s and 90s, the modern era equivalent of Burley, not necessarily in ability, because I think Burley was a better fighter, but just in the way his career trajectory was Mike McCallum. He was a maximum risk, minimal gain proposition. The guys didn't want to fight him because they wouldn't get that much money. Mike McCallum was not a big draw, but he was very effective. Burley was even more dangerous. He had kind of a, I don't know if saturnine's the right word, but he kind of had kind of a surly, because it rhymes with Burley, disposition. He changed managers a lot. He was always just kind of temperamental, kind of sullen and dour. He didn't have the charisma of Ray Robinson, so it was very hard for him to stick with one manager and who could really promote his career. He was always jumping managers, so it wasn't much you can do. He had to find a good manager and just stick with him through the thick and thin. He was one of the greatest, absolutely. He was a counter puncher with slick upper body movement, like Pernell Whitaker when he was in his prime. Sort of like that. He would stand right still. Archie Moore said it was like fighting an eel. He was slippery as an eel. I mean, he could stand right in front of you and still make you miss just with upper body movement. And his counters were just horrendous. I mean, he had KO power in his punches. He was kind of Jekyll and Hyde in the ring. He would follow up a spectacular performance with a safety first one that didn't excite everybody. So then people would get lukewarm on him, and then he'd explode again and have a great performance, and then he'd go lukewarm. So there was a lot of things that contributed to Burley not getting a title shot and not getting much more of what he deserved. Archie Moore stuck with it, Ezra Charles stuck with it, and eventually they rose to the heights. You know, Burley and Holman Williams and those guys, they just kind of went hot and cold, hot and cold. But I love Charlie Burley. I mean, you know, Fences was based on Charlie Burley, the Denzel Washington character.
Mm-hmm.
And August Wilson grew up across the street from Burley and just idolized the heck out of him.
Absolutely. So, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think he was a better welterweight or middleweight?
Middleweight. Middleweight was where he was at his best. Fighting Sugar Ray Robinson, I'd take Robinson against welter. I'd take Burley at middleweight. Burley beat Archie Moore at middleweight. I would never pick Ray Robinson against Archie Moore. Never.
Right.
Never. Even a middleweight version. Burley was much more dangerous at middleweight, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The other guy I always found to be really fascinating was Billy Seuss. I mean, there's a guy who basically was boxing with one eye, and yet still was quite a fighter. And think about the fighters of that time. You had Fritzy Zivik. You had all those guys. Pittsburgh really was the center of boxing.
It was. You had 5 champs within just a couple of years span there. You know, Zivik, Seuss, and all those guys. Kahn. Jackie Wilson. Seuss was great. Yeah, Seuss was excellent. He was a greater amateur even than professional. I mean, he is arguably the greatest amateur ever. I mean, they banned guys like him from boxing at Penn State just because he was knocking everybody out in the first round. He was so dangerous. I mean, here's a middleweight that's over 6 feet tall and just he could knock you dead. Yeah, Seuss is fantastic. Really good fighter. But yeah, the hand issues, you know. He had hand issues.
It was one hand.
Al Quail on top of the head and broke his hand, and it just never healed right.
Well, think about it this time. They didn't have the surgeries that we do now. They could never repair his hand that way.
Right. And that's one of the reasons, I mean, getting back to Harry Greb, why the people say, well, he doesn't have that many knockouts. Well, he couldn't risk trying to, you know, if he shattered his hands, he was done. He would have to wait months before his hands would heal, and that's food not getting on his table. You know, and Red Mason one time told him to knock this bum out. And, you know, Greb said, I'm not going to break my hands on this bum. I got a title fight next week or, you know, a big fight next week. So he chose volume over power. Seuss he had to kind of do that too. He relied on his left jab a lot more and his left hook than his right because he only had a couple good rights to throw, you know, before his hand would be useless. So, yeah, he was an excellent fighter. Managed by actor Dick Powell.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Dick Powell managed him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, in the book, your preface, Douglas, talks about that like 38 to 43 period where all of these guys, those 4 or 5, I mean, it's remarkable. Even though Pittsburgh was more of an epicenter of like American industry at that time, it still was a fairly small city versus a lot of these other. That is a remarkable thing to have that many guys. Back then, you didn't have 18 weight divisions either.
Yeah.
All these 54 champions, all this nonsense that we talk about now. I mean, you really had 8 weight divisions. You got 5 of them coming out of a city the size of Pittsburgh. That is a pretty amazing era, as you alluded to in the book.
Guys aren't getting title fights until they've got almost 100 bouts under their, you know, you really have to learn your trade. But hunger breeds fighters. Hunger breeds fighters. And Pittsburgh had a lot of immigrants. So you had a lot of hungry people who didn't want to spend sweltering days in those steel mills that were lining the Monongahela and Allegheny. They didn't want to, you know, die in coal mines from black lung. Like one fight could get them as much as a month in those coal mines. So you had all these immigrants. That's why Pittsburgh said, I mean, Billy Seuss was Hungarian. Greb and Klaus were German. Jackie Wilson was black. Fritzy Zivik was Croatian. Billy Kahn was Irish. Teddy Yaros was Polish. And you had all these different, George Chip was Lithuanian. You had all these different nationalities and, you know, racial mixes, and these were like hungry people who were living in the ghettos. You know, the point was an Irish neighborhood at one time. That's, you know, good fighters came out of there back in the early days because they were hungry. So, yeah, it's the hunger, poverty. It helps.
Yep, still does. We see it now because all the fighters are coming out of Eastern Bloc countries now. South American countries. That's where most of the fighting talent is coming from now. Like Emmanuel Stewart said, you want to find, what did he say? You want to find a great American heavyweight, look in the NBA or the NFL, tight ends and power forwards. He's right about that.
Right.
There's plenty of other options for Americans now versus people coming out of some of these other countries.
You know, the same types of waves of immigrants, like you said, most Eastern Europeans and people like that, who are, because they're the ones who know the poverty and they're the hungry ones.
Right. It presents opportunity. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, at the turn of the century, all the champs practically were Irish. And then in the 20s and 30s, it was the Italians and the Jews, and then the 40s and 50s, it was the Latinos and the blacks, and now you're seeing the Eastern Europeans rising. So it's an interesting study, really, especially the different Pittsburgh neighborhoods that housed the, the South Side was Polish, the North Side was Irish, Panther Hollow was Italian, and Bloomfield. It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Douglas, one thing that always intrigued me was reading about, we talked extensively about the Tunney Greb series, but just the beating Tunney took. Here's a guy who lost one fight in his career. Yeah. And it was such a savagely fight that Tunney was just thoroughly ripped apart. Talk a little about those middle rounds when some descriptions I had were face just plastered with blood, didn't understand how he was still going on.
I think it was Damon Runyon or somebody said, some fighters have broken jaws, broken nose. He says, tonight Gene Tunney has a broken face.
Right.
Just pounded him into hamburger. Tunney said it was like Greb was a red film phantom in front of me. I couldn't see through the blood. He was just all over the place. He says it was like fighting an octopus. He hit me, he spun me around, hit me again. He says all my punches were aimed and timed correctly, but it was like fighting an octopus. I couldn't hit him. And he was hitting me with everything. So he really trashed him badly. It was a type of beating that ends careers, really. It can. It really can, that kind of a beating. It was that bad. Yeah. Gene coming back, even though he lost the second fight, even though he was awarded the decision, the robbery, that he was able to come back and at least put up more of a fight says a lot about him. He was a gritty guy. But Greb had more experience. He was just more seasoned, and he was just a more natural fighter. He was a fighter. Tunney was a little more modern in his approach. I don't mean to badmouth him. He was a cherry picker. He avoided fighters in their primes. He avoided them in their primes, and he cherry picked. He never fought a black fighter. Greb fought any black fighter you put in front of him. So Tunney's, if you compare his career, you look at his resume compared to Greb's or Mickey Walker's or Benny Leonard, the other greats of the era, and there's really no contest. You could see who was fighting everybody and who was avoiding who. So I think Greb made him pay for that in a big way.
Wow. I always enjoy reading about that one.
Yeah, but it's intriguing. We hope we can find one of those Greb Tunney fights on film. It'd be something to see.
Yeah, it's weird that there wasn't any. I mean, a couple of them were in New York, so it's kind of interesting that you can't really find much tape on that. Like, strange.
Like I said, they didn't even find the World Series, 1960 World Series. Maxie Rosenblum, Slapsy Maxie, light heavyweight champion, who Greb also wailed the tar out of. He fought right here where I'm from, Los Angeles, right here in Hollywood, Tinseltown. He founded. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were founded at his nightclub. But here's a guy who was fighting right here in Tinseltown, and almost 300 fights, and we can't find any film of him right here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You figure those cameras must have been whirring every night that he fought, but they, nothing.
Maybe they ought to search further in Bing's attic to see if they can find any boxing.
Or Dick Powell. Because everybody was a fight fan back then. You never know who they were giving these reels to. Bing had a reel. I mean, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah. I'd love to see a Greb fight.
So Douglas, let me ask you this question. Who would you put on the Mount Rushmore of Pittsburgh fighters?
Oh, well, Greb, Kahn, and Burley. Those three without a doubt. Greb, Kahn, and Burley. And then it's hard. Then it gets hard because you have Zivik, but he has all those losses, but he has all those great scalps like Jake LaMotta. He beat Jake LaMotta, beat Henry Armstrong. You get Conhell. You can argue Sammy Angat. He beat all the great lightweights. And he first got to beat Willie Pep. Willie Pep was 62-0 until he fought Angat. Angat beat him. Willie Pep. And didn't lose again until he was like 135-1. That one loss was to Sammy Angat. You have Wee Willie Davies, who I said he beat all the flyweight champions. He beat them all, but he couldn't get a title shot. Frankie Gennaro would have nothing to do with him because he wailed the tar out of him in a non-title fight. Beat him, I think, 8 of 10 rounds. So Wee Willie, Angat, Zivic, or Teddy Yaros. Take your pick. I vacillate, but definitely Con, Burley, and Greb are the top.
Yeah.
The air is not as great, Douglas, but I want to feed off that one. What's your feelings about Spadafora? Because I was lucky enough to see him live a number of times. I mean, clearly his out of the ring problems and some of the other issues that surfaced were a huge problem. But he was a beautiful boxer. You talk about a throwback to the 20s or 30s. He was beautiful to watch. His head movement, his angles, and everything else. Where would you place him in any kind of list, Pittsburgh wise?
Sure.
He never really won any major titles or anything, but the sport was a lot different by the time he got into it.
It would be hard. I mean, I could probably figure something out, maybe top 25. It's just he doesn't have the scalps. I mean, pardon the expression, he doesn't have the great fighters on his resume that these other guys do. It just doesn't compare.
Right.
He was very talented. The problem is, you're right, he was a throwback, and what he really needed, I think, more than anything, was a throwback schedule, which is he's fighting for a few weeks so he has no time to get in trouble. I think fighters like him and Kelly Pavlik, who kind of had to retire early, they have too much time in between fights, and what do? You dissipate.
Yep.
Nothing to do but spend all this bloated paycheck you got for your last fight. You have nothing to do with
hangers on. Yep.
I mean, let me give you an example. Yasiel Puig. I mean, he got in a little bit of trouble when he was with the Dodgers, but he couldn't get in too much because he had a game the next day, and the next day, and the next day.
160 events.
Trouble. Yeah, but if Yasiel Puig had one game every 3 months,
who
I can't
knows?
imagine what he would have done.
Yeah.
So Paul could have done a lot more, I think, with just a much more busy schedule. He wouldn't have had any time to get in trouble. He lived in the gym, I heard. He was a hard worker.
Yep.
And he had all the skill in the world. So, yeah.
The times I saw him live in the 12th round, he wasn't even puffing. I mean, he was hardly ever hit, and he was never puffing. I mean, it was amazing positioning.
And that's a Pittsburgh hallmark, really. Greb never got tired. Kahn never got tired. McClellan, Klaus, these guys were just endless stamina. Yeah. They're just warmed up after 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds.
Yep. You're right.
You're right. Was the same way. It's a shame. I would have liked to have seen what he could have done with a busier schedule, but nowadays boxing, it's more of a hobby than a trade.
Well, the money's too big. We talked about this on our show. If you listen to it or watch us when we talk about this, the money's gotten too big. I mean, the Joshua Ruiz thing clearly showed that recently. Joshua's got all these, TV contracts and shoes and this kind of stuff. He's not focused on a boxing. I said to these guys, Ruiz can box. It could be risky, and it was. Yeah. It's not the full-time job anymore that it was.
No, and it needs to be. That's why when people say yesterday's fighters can't compare with today's because of superior nutrition and training, you got to be kidding. These guys were already in shape. I mean, Charlie Burley just had a fight 2 weeks ago. You're going to say he's in worse shape than a guy who had to train to get where he's at the last 8 weeks, do a cram session? No. Charlie's already in shape. He's going to whip your tail. Yeah, beat the heck out of Bernard Hopkins or any of those guys. He's already in shape. They don't have to train to get in shape. They're already in shape.
Correct. And the skill set, head deflection, head movement, shoulder movement, all that kind of stuff. They fought more, but they weren't getting hit and crunched in the temple or the jaw like they do now.
Yeah. I mean, you just learned your trade on the job, really. Better trainers back then. I mean, all these great trainers were in Pittsburgh at the time.
Yep.
Ray Arcel was here, the guy who trained Roberto Duran and countless others. He was training Tommy Yaros here.
Yep.
Who also couldn't get a title shot because he wouldn't do well with the mob. He wouldn't count out of the mob. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yesterday's fighters. I would take over today's any day. Floyd Mayweather's a bit of a throwback because he really takes his profession seriously. He trains hard, always in shape, always focused. Outside the ring, I don't care much for him. Inside the ring, I respect him. He's always in shape, always focused. He respects the game more than Ali. Ali would come in fat, out of shape all the time.
You're right.
He's never out of shape. He respects the game. He takes it dead serious. No matter who he's fighting, he's focused. He's not being dismissive, So,
he and Hopkins, I could do without their personalities, but that was the one thing that got them to Canastota. They were always in shape. They were always prepared to fight. And generally, they're strategic. Ugly as it might be in Hopkins' case, their strategic direction always got them the wins and kept them that longevity that they got.
Yeah.
You don't see that very much anymore. Guys can make so much money now that they don't need to go that long, and that corrupts it, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, well, then Bernard Hopkins going so long and Floyd going so long undefeated says more about the game than anything else.
It does. Yeah, I agree.
Bernard Hopkins would have 20 title defenses in the 1940s? No. Floyd Mayweather would go 50-0 or whatever back.
No. Sometimes an L is the best thing that ever happens. So,
So Douglas, why don't you tell us where we can find the book? And where we can find the book and where our listeners can buy it, certainly.
Amazon.com, when Pittsburgh was a fight town, is the name of it. Just type it into Amazon.com, and that's where you can get it for now. We're going to try and, like I said, get it out to stores and things like that. But for right now, where you want to get it is on Amazon. It's only $20. You're not going to get a better deal than that for that type of journalism that you're getting. It's just amazing. Roy is an outstanding writer. Was an outstanding writer.
If you were a fan of Pittsburgh sports or you were a fan of boxing, this thing is amazing. Absolutely amazing. It is worth every penny. It was certainly an honor to work with you. It was, as it is an honor to have you on our show tonight.
Thanks for all your help with the book, too. I couldn't have done it without you.
No, it's amazing, and I'm glad it's out there for people to read. Roy McHugh.
Tom Rooney, too. I got to give Tom Rooney a shout-out. Thank you, Tom.
He's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And one story we'll talk about after the break is Tom Rooney getting traded from the Pittsburgh Maulers. It's certainly something worth hearing, and we'll certainly talk about that after our break. We'll see you then.
The second in the series of Pittsburgh Greatest Books is out, Pittsburgh's Greatest Athletes. Takes you from number 1 to the 50th greatest athlete in Pittsburgh sports. These are truly the icons of sports in Western Pennsylvania. Pick it up at your local bookstore and at any online book retailer, including Amazon.com. Pittsburgh's Greatest Athletes.
All right. Welcome back from our break. Certainly a great, interesting interview. Douglas just knows the ins and outs of boxing everywhere.
I was ready to lace them up, fellas. I was ready.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The sport, it's still what he said is true. It generates tremendous passion. The people who follow it, they know everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to switch gears a little bit here. Two of my favorite countries are Florida and Montreal in Canada. Okay. And I always said to myself, Dave, and that's D for Duquesne, not Dave. I'm surprised you have yet to tell me to rip that damn thing off my head and put a Gothic D on it.
I'm with hey, I'm okay with it. I'm liking it.
I want revenue. I want revenue so we win the national title in football or basketball. So
that's true. That's true. So we're going to find out here. And Gary, you're going to tell me your opinion of those two great countries, aren't you?
I am. They're both close to me. Yes. So, yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you throwing it to me, Dave? Because I'm
throwing it to you to tell me all
you know buddy.
About the combination of Canada and Tampa Bay.
Gentlemen, this has been one of those things where I am excited and I'm confused. I'm skeptical, but yet I understand some of it.
I'm excited. That's Dave's life in a microcosm right there.
If I can add something, I remember talking to Patty about 40 years ago telling me she was excited and scared all at the same time. And I wasn't quite sure what she was talking about.
Well, that continues after her enduring, quite frankly, a 37-year season. That continues. But
there you go. There you go. But I digress. We're talking Canada.
Yes.
I don't want to stop when you're talking Canada here.
I mean, you guys know my love for hockey. Okay, yeah. So, and I love Canada. Everybody I ever met from Canada, I love them. They're friendly, they're courteous, they're engaging.
Don Cherry.
I love a lot about him too.
All right.
His purest nature and everything else. I think sometimes he should just shut up, like I always say, but there's a lot to like about him. Certainly love his love for Canada, love his love for the game of hockey.
And his sports coats. Don't forget the sports coats, Gary.
Love those sports coats. Yeah, I agree. And the dogs. and the dogs, the blue and the blue, version 16 or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I first heard it, it got me completely out of the blue. And I'm like, but you know what? Then I started thinking, you know what? I get it in some regards. Now, there's parts of it that I'm skeptical about, but I do get the idea that it's a good way for Major League Baseball to deal with one existing problem and test the waters in another area. I don't think logistically it can work easily. I don't think the Players Association is going to accept something like this easily. I think the part that makes me skeptical is this a feigned attempt to muscle the politicians into Tampa Bay to finally do something with an eyesore that has not been renovated? I was there last spring. It looks like it hasn't been renovated since 1989. I mean, is this a feigned attempt in both cities to partner together to basically get another asset so that they can enrich themselves? But by the same token, you do have a situation that's got a proven history in Tampa Bay that other than in the beginning with their winning, there really is no support. And it's not that difficult to figure out. You're playing indoors in an area where, quite frankly, you want to be outside all the time. And I think Montreal, to me, is still somewhat of a question mark. I mean, it didn't work before. Now, the stadium was horrible. And, they ran into all kinds of trouble. They had the best team in baseball. I do think, something with the dome or whatever could work. But, it was one of those situations which, there aren't that many things that catch us out of the blue anymore with the media where we are. This one caught me out of the blue. A minor league concept in a major league venue. What do you call a team? There's so many question marks about it, but it was intriguing in its own right when you think about it. And honestly, the biggest issue I think that concerns me the most is, again, our friends in New York running the business. Everybody else should take a look at the fact that, you've got a major league team in a market that's fairly significant and growing in population that can't make a go of it. Whatever you want to say about the country of Florida, that we have to consider something like this. The game needs some serious attention and some changes when you're looking at a situation like this. This is something you'd see in the Atlantic League with a team that doesn't have a home ballpark to play in. I mean,
right.
There's been no commentary other than Manfred's typical bland commentary. Well, we'll investigate all the options here. No, you got a big problem. You got a big problem that you got a city you're considering, and a city that has been a pretty damn good consistent performance history, that's saying, you know what, I can only make a go of it for a third of a season or a half of a season. So it's caused me a lot of issue, but to start out, that's my moment of the week, because when have you ever heard of such a situation in any professional sport in all the years we've been following this or thinking about this?
Right.
And it beyond the game's problems that we've discussed a million times, it tells you that you got some serious issues underlying here that you got to start dealing with. Expansion is not necessarily going to fix some of these. I mean, so that's my view of it. So I'm done with my Yes, I love both countries. I love Canada. I love Florida. They're both countries. I would spend time in both. Someday soon I'll do it.
So you would be
watching the same baseball team in both places when I do that.
You'd be a Rapo fan.
I would. Yes, I would.
Okay. Come on, they're the ExRays. Come on, they're the ExRays.
ExRays is a good one, right? Exactly.
You don't want me to name it after a U.S. Women's soccer player?
Oh, man.
Okay.
Gary, for me, I guess it's kind of hard to imagine fans in two different cities, two different countries, taking joint custody of one team.
Yep.
I like the idea, but only if the hearts of Montreal baseball fans don't get broken again. I mean, that just wouldn't be right. I love the days of Boots Day, of Coco LeBoy, of Bob Bailey, and your favorite, Dave, John Bacabella.
I've shown you the Coco LeBoy ball, haven't I? The dad.
Oh, the dual batter announcements. One in English, one in French.
Loved it.
Rusty Staub too, and I love that Park Jury had a swimming pool in the outfield long before it became a gimmick in Arizona. But
yep.
Maybe this move will take a little sting out of what the Expos fans they still call it Blue Monday, and that's the day in 1981 when Rick Monday homered off of Steve Rogers. sent the Dodgers to the World Series. That was the closest the Expos ever got. Or then there's 1994 where they had maybe their best team and the season ended because of the strike. And then in 1995, they just sold off the whole franchise. So, I can imagine maybe a few big crowds at the beginning, but, I don't know that it would last. And it's because, if the team isn't winning, especially, there's a whole generation of Montreal kids who've now grown up not watching or even playing baseball. There are not as many diamonds around that city. In the suburbs, they're all into hockey still, and now basketball with the Raptors. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see those Expos uniforms again. Dave, you have the Expos hat, which I covet.
And I have a Tim Raines shirt, by the way.
Oh, I forgot about Tim Raines.
Yeah.
I guess the romantic in me would love to see Montreal fans cheering on baseball again.
Can I interject one thing here, Dave, before you respond? I honestly, the more I consider this, thinking about this over the past week, I think, Chris, this resembles a little bit. What was it? Loria he was the art dealer out in New York that owned the Expos, right? And he had the relationship with the Florida Marlins, and then he eventually bought the Florida Marlins. I kind of feel, is it Steinberg down in Tampa? I kind of feel like that's what they're doing here. I feel like they're giving dialogue behind the scenes with Manfred and the other powers that be that we're not really sure this is going to work. There's clearly a political strain between the leadership of Tampa Bay and Tampa Bay Rays with what's needed. And I think that part of this got thrown out there, not just for negotiating for the stadiums and the money and everything else, but I really think there's been some talk like this is a way we're going to see if baseball in Montreal will work again. All those exhibition games are selling like hell. People are saying they want it. People are wearing Expos jerseys, even in Philadelphia at games when the Nationals come in. So people are clamoring for this. This is a way to test it. And if it booms, I think you're going to see the Tampa Bay Rays are going to get folded up. They're going to move to Montreal. They're going to be in a different league. So you don't have the Tampa, the Toronto, Montreal issue. I honestly think it's kind of almost letting the groundwork go, just like Luria selling the Expos to Washington and then buying the Florida Marlins for. I think we're kind of seeing that, not necessarily reported. Some of the media is not picking up on it, but the more I think about it, I honestly think that's kind of what it is. Well, I think that's what we're seeing here.
You might be right, but let me just say in one word what this is: insane. From a business standpoint, it cannot work. So this guy expects, the Steinberg, he expects to do this, have them build a cheaper stadium for him because they don't need a top on, and then they're going to build a brand new one in Montreal to boot. So you're going to get two teams. Where do you have, if you win the series, where do you have the parade? That should tell you everything that you know about how this is going to work.
True.
This isn't just one big game for Montreal where they can sell out the event and say, look, we can sell baseball. You're getting somebody else's team, okay? It's going to be named the Tampa Bay Rays. And the interest in my eyes, if this team is winning, it has a chance to draw. But who's going to go there in a situation such as this? This is nothing more than a little power play by Tampa Bay to get a new stadium. They have a pretty well ironclad deal till 2027. The mayor is not going to go for this of St. Pete. He's not going to allow him out of that contract to do that. They need a new stadium. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. The Tropicana Field is a joke.
And it's too hot. You can't watch baseball there. It's too damn hot.
Exactly. But this is not going to work. You can't, over a period of 5 and 6 years, split a team like this. And it has happened once before between Montreal and Puerto Rico, and it didn't work then either. So this is an absolutely insane idea. It's not a serious idea. It's nothing more than a power play. There are too many factors in this. Do I think Montreal can support a team? I think it can support its own team. I think the owners of the Expos kind of screwed them after the 94 strike, and the Montreal fans were much more bitter than the nutting detractors here in Pittsburgh, and they never bought into it anymore. But I do think if you get a serious owner up there, there are people that will accept this team if it is theirs. A split like this over a period of time is not going to work. If they're serious about it, we got bigger issues in baseball than just this.
Well, that's my point. Right.
Yeah.
John Boccabella.
I would love to see a reincarnation of the Expos. You know my love for them. And I think it's insane. I think from a business standpoint, I'm not understanding what they're drinking.
Well, I think it's positioning, Dave, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Sternberg and his other partners say, look, we tried to come up with any solution. Local city management is not going to work with us at all. So guess what? We're moving.
Yeah.
I think what they're doing is instead of saying we're just going to move there, become partners with other big egos, the Bromphans, whatever. I guess I'm part of the Canadians. We're going to test this thing. That's what they're throwing out. And then but the reality is they kind of know that they're close to doing it anyway, because they're not going to get a new stadium. They're not going to get a deal there. And I think they're making it look like, well, this is an attempt to make it work. The reality is I think they're thinking about that down the road.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Put a team in Montreal or put a team in Portland. Either one of those teams can get it out of Tampa Bay.
Did you ever see The Battered Bastards of Baseball, a documentary about the Portland Mavericks?
I did not. I've seen it on my Netflix feed a few times.
If you have Netflix, check that out. It is one of the great baseball documentaries I've ever seen.
Portland Mavericks. So is this a PCL team, or what was
It was an independent A-ball team that Kurt Russell's father, who was a star in Gunsmoke, purchased in the 70s, and he turned it into one of the greatest. It was the only independent team in the minors at that point, and it turned it into the greatest drawing minor league team in the game. It's a story about that, story how Major League Baseball came back and stole the market from them. But now it's also the father of the current independent leagues that we see now.
Okay.
Great story.
Why, to me, the big question is, why does Major League Baseball have this ridiculous romantic mentality of we tried something, it didn't work? What's wrong with the franchise moving? Florida has been, as much as I hate to say it, because I am going to spend time there as I age, I'd like it to work. It hasn't worked in either place. It was nice to try. Yes, all the business parameters are there, the population growth, the income levels.
It's great for minor league baseball, Gary, but it's not great for
it hasn't worked for MLB. So let's move it where it belongs.
It's great for that, but you're right. It does not work.
Let's move it where it belongs. I mean, if you got teams that are getting outdrawn double, Chris, by minor league franchises, what the hell are you doing? Now, I know you got leases signed, you built new ballparks and all that kind of stuff, but I'm sorry. You can, if you're running a retail shopping center and your stores wants to close, you can negotiate a buyout. You can do the same thing here. Why does Major League Baseball think that people have – is there any romanticism about the Tampa Bay Rays or the Florida Marlins? No. So we tried it. It didn't work. Move the franchise.
Let me just say Jimmy Morris, okay? Jimmy Morris. There's romanticism. While you're going to live in Florida, Fletch and I are going to get a co-op in Hermione and spend our latter years there.
There you go.
What do you got?
I'll be there all the time, but I'm going to spend some time there. So.
Well, guys, we said goodbye to two former Penguins, both of whom played key roles in the Stanley Cup runs, and both were fan favorites who will be remembered fondly. First, we had Max Talbot, who played a total of something like 700 games in his 11-year career, more than half of those with the Penguins. He only scored 52 goals and 56 assists in that time, but 2 goals are pretty important. In Game 7 against the Red Wings, he scored both goals in that 2-1 win. The other thing that he's probably most famous for was, of course, came in the 2009 playoffs. His of the Flyers crowd after a fight with Dan Carcillo in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference quarterfinals. Guys, that's one of the most memorable moments, not only from that series, but the rivalry between those two teams. Fellas, I maintain that fight was the difference in that series. I think if that doesn't happen, I don't know that they move on. I mean, that fight fired up his teammates, and they went out and they closed out the Flyers. Talbot's still going to be involved with hockey. He joined that sports firm, Creative Arts Agency. They also represent Sid, so I think that he'll be around for a while. So he was a great energy guy. The type of guy you love to have on your team, the type of guy that this current rendition of the Penguins could use someone like him. The fans loved him, like I said, in his commercials. He'll always hold a special place in the hearts of Pens fans.
Yeah.
He also loved Brooks Orpik, and who also announced he was hanging up his skates.
Yeah.
When I think of Brooks Orpik, I think of 15 seconds that defined him as a Penguin. And you guys remember that shift in the 2008 finals against Detroit? 15 seconds, he laid out 4 killer checks. I think we're the only ones that he didn't hit during that shift.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I got a bruise on my shoulder today from that hit.
Oh, it was crazy. 4 Red Wings in 15 seconds. Crazy. You don't see stuff like that. And Orpik, he was a tough defenseman, and I really hated to see him go and especially to go to the Capitals. That one hurt me. I mean, I understand it's a business. He won a cup there, and here's the thing about it: he was just as beloved by that locker room as he was in Pittsburgh, because he was that kind of guy. The other thing about Orpik is he was able to hang around because he was a disciple of Gary Roberts. I mean, if Gary Roberts didn't come to the Penguins, I don't know that Orpik has as long of a career. And it came out on one part. He really picked up, Gary Roberts, besides being a who's approached in Detroit, eyes along with my sandwich. But this was a typical Orpik breakfast. 3 eggs, pan-fried in olive oil, mixed berries, granola, and a green smoothie, which was banana, kale, spinach, coconut water, shredded coconut, non-fat Greek yogurt, and wheatgrass. I might even throw some spinach, sprouts, and beets in there too for breakfast. And then his recovery drink. By the way, speaking of drinks, tonight's drink, by the way,
Please.
Banana bread beer, and it actually tastes like banana bread. Unbelievable.
Oh my God.
How do you find this stuff?
But guys, Orpik was the backbone of that defensive core, and I wish both him and Talbot the best in their retirement.
Absolutely.
Let me add 2 things to that. Talbot comes here, okay? A place that they hate everything Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh wins all the time, in that rivalry, at least up until recently. They loved him here. You're right on the money, Fletch. They loved him here too. He didn't do the ads and stuff, not quite as popular as he was in Pittsburgh, but they loved him here too. And you're absolutely right. Orpik was playing. The reason the Capitals won the Stanley Cup, he was one of the huge reasons.
Yep, I agree.
39 years of age. Here he is against all these young studs, 23, 24, bigger, Vegas, everything else, their speed. He was a physical presence. He had guys looking over his shoulder. He was playing a good 18, 20 minutes a game down the street. You cannot take that away from the guy. That is a tremendous professional over a long, long, long career. I agree with you. Hooray for Brooks. Great career. Nothing
in Pittsburgh sports championship history, you put Talbot in the same sentence as Mazeroski.
Absolutely.
Put it in the same sentence as Clemente, Bradshaw, guys who were there when their team needed the most to win a championship.
Yep.
All you need to know about him is he saves his greatest offensive output for Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final against a team who's heavily favored. I mean, he cemented himself. It doesn't matter what he does, where he goes. He's one of the greats of Pittsburgh sports because of one game.
Yep.
Not that he wasn't a good contributor in his career, but that game is where you need a guy like Talbot to come through. Without him, I mean, you're going into overtime, and who knows what happens at that point.
Remember, Crosby was injured in that winning series.
Right.
He already played it all in that third period.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. Talbot, Letang, and Fleury are buddies. They're all those French Canadians up there, Quebec, whatever. they were all big guys
Yeah.
in that series, particularly Fleury and Talbot. But, I mean, look at your penalty killers in hockey. Those guys who are tremendous will-driven penalty killers like Talbot was. You need those guys in your locker. You don't have them, you're not winning in the NHL.
Right.
Not over 10 months.
And the Penguins found that out after '93 when they traded away or got rid of the grit. So You're absolutely right. Absolutely.
Yep.
Can I tell you a little story, guys?
Yes.
The 1979 story, as we're 40 years into it. I'm a senior at Greensburg Central Catholic. I come home on a weekday, and I turn on my TV, and somewhere there was this John Hopkins Syracuse game. I'm wondering to myself, what the hell is John Hopkins and Syracuse doing on my TV on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon as I come home? I look at the bottom and it says ESPN. I don't know what the hell ESPN is, but I know I'm nuts about sports, and I certainly love lacrosse, and it began that day watching that game. As we came to know ESPN, which was nothing in probably about 1 million households countrywide at that point, including, luckily, Heron Cable in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which was Western Pennsylvania's either first or second cable company, and half, as Fletcher would refer to my father as, was one who was always on top of technology, so he made sure we had it. And we watched it that day. And ESPN has become a big part of all our lives. But back then, in its infancy, we were led by men like Jim Simpson, who was certainly a great voice from NBC, who was the big free agent ESPN signed in '79 when they came on. Chris Berman, Tom Mees, who tragically died in the pool in I believe sometime in the '90s. Greg Gumbel, Dickie V, who was a quiet basketball announcer who didn't know if he could become a basketball announcer in '79 when they offered him $150 a game to announce teams as he was just out of a job. George Grand, one of my favorites, the eternal Tam.
Cincinnati guy, yep.
Lou Palmer, Charlie Steiner, Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann, and one of my favorites who was the beginning host on The Daily Show, Craig Kilborn. All were great people who made SportsCenter serious and fun all at the same time for sports fans. But the man who connected the eras from 1979 till now, in my eyes, was Bob Lee.
Yep.
They called him the General. You knew not to sit in his seat. He was tough, but he was a serious journalist. Something we need now, something we're desperate for now. Outside the Lines, to me, is one of the great enduring legacies of Bob Lee, one of the great shows, sports anthology shows that we have. He was a professional. He's an Emmy Award winner. He, to me, probably got a little nudged out because he's not the new got to cater, got to take the political stance, things that ESPN eventually became that made it unattractive. It's a sports station. It should be a sports station. It should be what these guys began. And Bob Lee was at the forefront of that. And he retired this week. And we're going to be lesser sports fans because of it.
We lost. Yeah, we lost.
His serious approach to sports and, making it what ESPN made it early on is something that he tried to do, as he would get pushed to the back and pushed to the side, unfortunately, by the station. I'm going to miss Bob Lee, and certainly it's the end of the legacy. He's the end of the link between the beginning and what ESPN is now. And, they're lesser people for it. Absolutely.
I agree. Fully.
Well said, Big. Well said.
Yeah.
Right on the
money. All right. What we're going to do now is we're going to give some predictions, because the Rivers Casino, believe it or not, now has an online operation. Okay, so what we're predicting here, people can now go on the Rivers and make those bets.
Follow our predictions.
Absolutely. So, Fletch, I know you want to make some people some money. All right?
Well, Dave, I did my prediction earlier this afternoon.
Okay.
And I thought about it. And right before we come on, we were coming on there, I saw that it's actually coming true. So this week, the lawyer for a family of a 2-year-old toddler who was hit by a foul ball announced that she had a broken skull and she was suffering seizures.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the Pirate players that come out in support of let's get some netting up there. Now, as we were sitting down, we're getting ready to tape. There's a story in the Post-Gazette that the PNC Park, they will be doing that.
Yes.
So my prediction was going to say, baseball couldn't continue to ignore this. Like I said, the Pirate players came out. They are going to do it. I think it's going to go across the league this offseason. I think there's a lot of structural stuff that needs to be that they need to take a look at. So it's going to take a little bit of time.
Right.
But in the meantime, listen, if you've got a small child and you're not keeping an eye on him and her, do not sit there in those field boxes.
Don't start laughing, Dave.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Just don't do it.
Ridiculous.
2 hours last night, he was telling me the same thing. And
I am, Chris, you are so on the money. And our friend, now it's interesting, Dave, you talk about Bob Lee.
Yeah.
This is where we're going to miss Bob Lee.
Yeah.
Some clown, and I'll leave it nameless in this public forum, writes an article on the back of that little girl's injuries, which was mostly due to the fact that she is born to morons. Who takes a 2-year-old and sits them down the line at a Major League Baseball game, even 35 years ago?
Yeah.
This is insane. But continue on, Fletch.
No, I mean, just don't do it.
Look.
Don't do that.
I've been nervous about sitting in that place all my life because I'm not a 2-year-old, but I don't have the reaction time to catch some of those line drives. It's insane, and I use that term a second time, but this hasn't been done years ago. Now you have stronger players, you have a juice ball, you have little bandbox stadiums.
No foul territory.
1,700 people have been injured. I don't know the time period by foul balls in Major League Baseball. I don't think it's enough. It's enough. It's ridiculous. I mean, I don't want it to get to the point like in hockey where I thought it was insane to sit in slapshot lines with no netting in hockey.
Right.
It took a little girl dying in Colorado for the NHL to get their heads out of their asses. Now, I call for every major league owner to get your head out of your ass and put this up. Anybody who is going to be macho and say, I don't want to sit, I want to catch the foul ball, get your head out of your ass. Because chances are, you're going
to drop it anyway because you're a loser. If you come to the game, you're a loser. And if you catch a foul ball and you rip it from a kid, you're a loser. All of those are loser things.
Exactly. Although if I ever get a foul ball, I'm not giving it to a little kid. I'll tell you that much. I'm keeping the damn thing. But anyways, I digress. But it is a responsibility of the parents. So when I took my kids there, I'm scared to be there. I don't know why I take a 2-year-old. I took them to the upper deck.
What are you doing, even with a net, taking a 2-year-old to that spot? If Major League Baseball had any stones at all, they would come out and say, look, people got to take some responsibility for them. Houston.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just going to say this. We're sitting down the line. Some friends of ours. Don't sit there then. Go upstairs. Go in the luxury box. What's wrong with you? It's Major League Baseball. Moron. It's not sitting in a coffee shop. What the hell are you doing there?
I agree.
Hey? And honestly, Manfred needs to come out and say, look, it's a big problem. We've got a big liability issue. It's a different game. You're right, Dave. Juice balls, small parks, bigger hitters, 98-mile-an-hour fastballs. Put the nets up. We'll get used to it. End of story. I don't want to hear about some kid with a bow on getting hit by some clown from ESPN trying to make a social issue out of it.
Yeah.
Dumbass, you're the one who's getting fed by the game, so shut up. Okay?
That's the Gary we love. That's a Gary we love right there.
Stupid ass.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying to hide the facts. We're all journalists even on this, but come on.
I want you to tell that stupid ass what your prediction is.
My prediction is that, talking about Major League Baseball quickly, all the sports are guilty of this. I think basketball has become international in Asia, in Europe, and places like that. Hockey's always been an international game. There's a lot of press out there about this trip because they put Boston Yankees over in London. This is going to be such a big thing for Major League Baseball. Baloney. England is a soccer country, a boxing country, and a rugby country, and some cricket. They don't care about baseball. This is nonsense. Baseball should focus on its problems at home, like one team leaving Florida and having to play spring training games to justify even the ballpark they're in to go to Montreal. Forget about this now. Fix your own shop, fix your own world, your own country, then worry about going. I think there'll be plenty of people there because it's an event. It ain't going to do anything for Major League Baseball. My prediction is, at the end of the day, this isn't going to help all that much.
So the Miami-London Marlins will not ever be
going to help us that much. So
okay.
That's my prediction.
Don't count out those West Ham fans, though. Come on.
Exactly. Losers. You're losers in West Ham. What are they? Where's your damn sign?
There we go.
There you go. Busher of the week. There we go. We got to have one.
What you got, Big Daddy? Bring us home.
All right. Well, my prediction of the week is going to be Neil Huntington is going to get screwed again. The man desperately wants to sell people, okay? He just wants to do this. He wants to make the trades. And this team is making it difficult for him for the second consecutive year. So he doesn't know what to do at this point, okay?
Cut the clothes off, Dave. Cut the clothes off.
Oh, man. Doesn't know what to do. So basically, my prediction is he's going to let this team stand pat. And that's a mistake. Okay?
Trade Vasquez, Dave. Trade him.
He needs to get the cojones to trade Starling Marte because this team has a nice young base. There are more good things going on this year than bad. But Newman at second, Tucker at short is going to be our best second short combination in 40 years.
Particularly catching the ball. Yep.
Absolutely. Bell at first is becoming a star. Moran for now, who is playing much better than anybody could have ever expected, a clutch hitter, is going to end up being replaced by Ke'Bryan Hayes, who's the best fielding third baseman I think we've ever seen in our lifetime. We've never had a great fielding third baseman for all intents and purposes over long periods of time. You can't think of one, can you?
Been a long time.
The closest I can think of is Steve Buechele.
Steve Buechele, I was going to say the same. Yep.
So I think they ought to also explore signing Dickerson to a few more years until
you trade Vasquez. I do.
I'm offering them out there.
You can get closers out there, and if you can improve your team, I say it's the right thing to do. I agree. So while my prediction is you're going to not do anything because you're cutting a crossroads like you were last year, you need to just have the cojones to do a little tweaking here. Your two best stars aren't going to destroy this team by trading them. And what you bring back can replenish your farm system and possibly get that pitching staff, which, by the way, let them pitch with what their strengths are. Quit the hit their pitch to contact bullshit. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And
not for everybody.
You told Archer to stop the three-finger fastball that he's given up most of his home runs on. He's been a damn good pitcher pretty much since you told him to stop it.
He's no Mordecai Three-Finger Brown, I'll tell you that.
He is not. He is not.